We are live. Season 2, episode 5 of Wake Up and
We're live.
Deliver. I think you froze, John. Oh, you were frozen there for a
I
second.
did freeze
I was
there.
gonna
I see that.
I was gonna say we should take the old recording and have as a button like a wake up and deliver.
Yeah, I've been looking into like a Stream Deck, which I think is like something that would allow us to do that. So there's like some high-end ones, and then there's like some tester. Let's call them entry level ones on Amazon that we'll take a look at.
Entry level. Fair. All right. As always, we're gonna start off with some coffee for the morning. And as a new way of showing it, we're gonna display it. Everything you do with or without an audience provides evidence to what about who you are and what you're capable of. What you are capable of.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh,
I agree. I think it's in a lot of the same ranges, like, the concept of how you do anything is how you do everything, right? And the concept of performance only under certain, or standards, maybe is probably a better way to put it, only under certain circumstances is probably quite telling.
yeah. We're starting off February, quite volatile. I'm just gonna put my viewing laptop a little bit higher so I can look like I'm looking at the camera. It's starting off a little volatile today. A little
Or
craziness
volatile.
from last week, this week, Saturday night. It was announced that tariffs were imposed on Canada, Mexico, and China. Canada and Mexico are the ones that were extremely not concerned about, that we were going to talk about. And then Canada right away retaliated. Mexico is going to say something this morning. Massive news. I mean, we could talk about logistics, but this is going to affect logistics. And kind of to start that off, I wanted to bring to the stage some, and I only picked CNN because it had a nice visual, not because I have any preference to any news. As John would always say, I'm not plugging
Sorry,
in.
super random. Bring your mic closer so everyone can hear you, because as you're moving around,
Sorry, is that better?
that's way better. There you go. Everyone wants to hear your voice in the morning. That's the best way to start the week.
You got to start it off with the morning voice with Matt. Anyway, so we have the markets in Asia are down with the news with tariffs over the weekend. The markets in Europe are down, and then we have the markets in America and Canada and Americas are down with the news of tariffs. So it's a lot of instability, a lot of people questioning what is going on, and it's creating a lot of instability. One of the other ones I saw was there's a rush towards gold, which is usually the thing that happens when markets are unstable. Everybody rushes to a value that they can hold on to, which is typically gold. And I'm no economist, I'm no stock trader, so don't take any of this as anything except for we're seeing the effects of how when supply chains are affected, it can create chaos in the greater world.
Do you know what's funny though? So like my newsletter 2 weeks ago, I kind of said, I explained to everyone why I was like, no, tariffs are coming. Like it wasn't a question. I was like, they are coming. It was
Yep.
more in the context of China. But the crazy thing though, now that to your point that you're seeing gold going up, it's actually not very favorable for the US, because one of the big things that, in my opinion, and again, I'm not an economist either, but really trying to understand like what are these external pressures, because the reality is it's not shirts and pants getting into the country that has everyone up in arms, right? So looking at what had been going on, China had recently started a whole gold back, like their own currency gold back deals, like essentially stocks, bonds, whatever it is. Like I said, not an economist, but they started their own currency based gold transaction kind of activity. So this is funny because it's actually going to
Helping
accelerate. It's going to accelerate a little bit what they had already been doing, and making themselves a kind of like de facto 1B. Like I don't want to say like a number 2, but maybe more like a 1B reserve currency and stuff like that, which is very, very volatile for the global economy. And I think this is a risk that might have been underestimated, from any U.S. actions.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of a lot of different players in the game right now that are affecting and looking at this closely. Who's it benefiting? Why is it benefiting them? What are we going to do different? And it's going to be volatile next couple weeks until we can really flesh it out because these are the first set. Like the next one is April 1st, I believe you said, against the European Union. And South Africa was now just, I think this morning they're talking about something about South Africa, and some other BRIC countries. Um, I don't know. I mean, out of all the countries in the world, they say the United States is the most able to be self-sufficient, based off their own economy. And
Yeah, if
these are,
if they don't want to have smartphones and stuff, sure.
I mean, sure.
No, I don't know. I look. I think at the end of the day, probably a lot of countries have a pretty decent degree of capability, like even us, right? But there's huge impacts, like even something. I was going into it because again, we'll preface this for everyone, not economists. We're logistics and supply chain operations people, but I yesterday for the newsletter, I took a way deeper dive into all kinds of like different types of things. And I was like, why is Canada so big for quote unquote energy, right? Like to the point where, the US didn't tariff it as much. And then you find out, well, like they use our oil, even though they have their own reserves, but then there's a difference between our heavy crude versus their light sweet, I guess is kind of like the way they frame this thing. And then, kind of also highlighting the fact that, people walking around being like, oh, we can produce our own oil. It's like, well, your refineries aren't actually set up to produce that. And, investment in terms of like refineries and things like that has actually been one of the slowest types of things in that industry because of the fact that over the last couple of decades especially, you've seen more and more of a push away from oil. So it's like no one wants to build brand new refineries for something that everyone's trying to essentially
Move away from.
like decentralize and not have the core anymore, right? So it's like, no, you can't just build new refineries. And then let's not forget about all the pipelines that pump this stuff right into those refineries right from Canada into the US that have been built over the last 70 years. It's like, this isn't stuff, and this is the same type of thing that I shared when I got into it a couple of weeks ago too, is that reshoring or just having American or Canadian manufacturing or anyone, it's just not that easy. You're not just going to throw up a plant, all of a sudden be at the right economy of scale, be able to, have your costs that are so in line. Like the reality is a lot of these production facilities in Asia are top tier, like top tier facilities.
Yeah, and not only that is the different labor laws and different things,
Oh
less
yeah, I mean,
unions, and there's like a lot of different factors that bring into the whole piece, and the workforce that wants to work in those factories for those prices. I think if you told millennials now or the new workforce that to go work in a factory, and the factory jobs aren't the same as they were in the 70s and the 80s, where someone could work one factory job and have a massive house and 6 cars and everything like that and be set up for life. They obviously
yeah. Now,
changed
now,
that.
now you could work 6 factory jobs and still just maybe get a Happy Meal.
Exactly, right? So it's a
Yeah.
lot different. A lot of different workforces in play.
Yeah.
I don't think it's as simple as nearshoring. But on that note, I brought up a few little kind of things I wanted to show, as always, not
Okay.
as always, but as topics. We'll bring back the news. One thing that we've been hearing a lot of is Trump accuses Canada of being very abusive with our trade. I think that the statistic was if we removed oil, we would be actually in a deficit. It would be a surplus for American trade.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh yeah, we're super abusive. Super abusive. You take away oil and you actually make more from us.
Exactly, because we purchase a very abundant of everything from the United States, whether it comes from food, whether it comes from manufactured goods. We have a very intertwined supply chain. We provide the
Hmm.
natural resources, they manufacture it, and they send it back to us. And it's been like that process for the longest time. Another interesting thing I found is these retaliatory, not direct um, tariffs, but these supplemental things that people are doing. And then the one that I saw that was interesting was, you know, Ontario just rips up Starlink contract, right? As a proxy of close advisement to Trump. You have Musk with the Starlink. Ontario's going after the supporters, and it's starting to show that we're going to be tough on these aspects. I'm not sure. I've read a few different things. Should we be as tough with the Americans as in we as the Canadians should be as tough with the Americans? What should be the stance? Um, I don't know. Um, what do you think, John? Like,
Well, I mean, funny you show this one. If I was picking a headline, it wouldn't be this one. It would be like the LCBO and like 5 other of our provincial liquor boards stopping all all American liquor from coming into Canada, which I think is a few billion. You know what I mean in terms of that impact and stuff like that. The stuff with Elon Musk, I think look, that's a whole other thing. I think as a business person, he's starting to put himself in a lot of crosshairs or opinion because of the affiliation. I mean, I saw another article this morning was talking about him and being an influence to close down a U.S. agency that doles out humanitarian aid, and I just think that
it should be a carte blanche. It shouldn't just be everything that is American. All of a sudden, it gets like we don't no longer want.
Yeah, I mean,
and on that topic,
they're picking the things though. They're going to pick the things that are going to hurt, right? Like you're not like you're not going to pick something inconsequential. It won't matter.
And the other part that kind of bothered me over the weekend, and I don't know if this probably would get me some hate messages in my DM, maybe, is the booing at the hockey game.
Oh, the Raptors game?
And the hockey games. I'm like, that's uncalled for. It's a game. Sports has nothing to do with politics. It's not their fault.
Yeah, and the guys on the ice or on the court, like, yeah, they had zero say in terms of.
It's the national anthem. Still always be respectful. That's one thing that these are political challenges. Don't be going after specific people in this. It does need to be kind of talked through and hashed out. So this is one that you're talking about. Provinces respond to tariffs, U.S. pulling from liquor. And that's not just Ontario. Ontario, the LCBO, for those who are listening don't know, is the world's largest purchaser of alcohol, single source purchaser of alcohol.
LCBO's got some clout, and everybody wants to be in the LCBO's buy book. You know what I mean?
massive, and they pay well and they pay on time and all that aspect. Like you're not dealing with a private firm. Like you get it's a great contract to have, and the same as with every other liquor board across Canada, right? The one thing that I did read, which I found very interesting, is this is a push for Canadians because as probably Americans don't know, interprovincial trade is very horrible in Canada. It's not as cohesive as in the United States. And there's a very big push now in Canada to go, why aren't we trading better? And liquor is one of those big things that we don't do well, trading amongst each other. You can't take liquor from Ontario and bring it over to Quebec, and I can't buy a liquor in Quebec and bring it over to Ontario. Actually, you can get charged for smuggling. There's a lot of different circumstances for that. So they're saying that we're going to revamp a lot of these supply chain issues within
as an Ottawa native, I can tell you that there's cross-border.
Oh, there is, but if you get caught,
yeah,
if you get caught,
no, I agree with you. I think that and the funny thing you see there, like BC, Ontario, and Quebec. I mean, obviously appreciate all the Canadian provinces, but like those 3 provinces right there are capturing the lion's share of our buying power and the impact. So that's a massive blow. In terms of like something going into the US. The other thing is too and this is what I'm trying to work through and watch more this morning. There's a lot of confusion around the tariffs, like on one side, and then what has been predominantly more e-commerce focused, which is like the de minimis and duty-free regulations. And that's because both Canada and Mexico, right, allowed for warehousing of goods. If you're like, let's say you're an American seller, you could bring it into Canada, you could bring it into Mexico. Both countries supported a program where you wouldn't pay duties on those goods if they were only for export.
Yep.
So you could store them, manipulate them to a certain degree, and this is like a little bit dicey because you're not supposed to be able to do a ton in a bonded warehouse, but picking and packing essentially of like, hey, this came from manufacturing, I'm picking and packing, or just taking essentially shipments that are already prepackaged, holding them, and then pushing them back out, both qualify. So those shipments, those exports have been a huge backbone of e-commerce, right? People leveraging either the better transit times or some of the geographic advantages of being in Canada, right? Or some of the advantages of being in Mexico with maybe lower labor rates and real estate rates, things like that, when you're actually holding product in a warehouse and then shipping it into the US. So now there's a lot of discussion about when they said that the de minimis doesn't apply, some people think that it no longer applies only if the goods are Canadian or Mexican or Chinese, for example.
Mhm.
My position is that that's not true, is that the intent and what they're going to clarify is that it's any shipments, irrespective of country of origin, coming from these countries, because if not, it would make the president kind of hollow in the sense of saying, oh, X, Y, and Z country, Canada, Mexico, China, is not doing enough to stop fentanyl, whatever it is, from coming into the country. But that problem wouldn't be happening just when it said made in Canada and it was going 321. Like, it would be from anywhere. Any shipment that's kind of now on Canadian soil, on Mexican soil, for example, that's then being reshipped into the US under this, kind of very quick and duty-free program would be the problem. So I'm advising everyone that no, it's anything. It's any shipments, irrespective of the country of origin. The tariffs, of course, apply specifically, but the same kind of impact, like, the benefit that people got by doing the 321, I would say, is probably, probably in the range of this, like, 20 to 25% benefit, right? Because you were still paying warehousing, you were paying a little bit of extra transportation and things like that, but you weren't having to declare those costs, and they weren't then, there were no duties on them anyway. And then e-commerce goods vary like quite a bit. Like footwear has like 11, just over 11%.
Well, I think you're missing a big part of that too. Is you deferred some of those taxes, and I think that's one thing that people don't realize is when you have them so if I bring in, let's say, 100 container full of a product I'm bringing in from China, and I'm going to bring it into Mexico, and I'm going to bring it into Canada, I'm going to be storing it. If I brought it directly into the United States, I have to pay those 100 container taxes right as soon as I get them across the United States. But because I can defer them into Canada and Mexico and piecemeal it in, I'm only going to start paying those taxes as soon as they get across, and so I don't have as much of a burden on that aspect of it, right?
Yeah, it's like I mean, it's been a massive win, right? And so looking to obviously shut that down, because the funny thing is, and I would offer you go check out the newsletter, but I broke out why I talked about why the kind of irony around some of these things, especially when you consider the USMCA that Trump himself renegotiated in 2020.
Yeah, one thing that we have to clarify, I want to clarify, is they said it on Saturday, but it's not signed yet until Tuesday. So there is not hope, but there's conversation that this is a tactic of negotiation to get something else, shock and awe. There's a lot of pressure now on President Trump to pull back from what he's doing. So there might be.
Won't be able to. Like, definitely not by tomorrow, not by midnight tonight, essentially, which is when they come into play. It would just make them look like silly, and no one's going to want to show that they essentially caved one way or another. And I agree with you; they're looking for concessions on other things, but there's no way this ends today. Like, just no chance, because it'll look too Mickey Mouse. It'll look too it would just look bad on everybody.
I don't know. I think there's also that caving into pressure, saying, "Hey, we got what we wanted." Canada said they're investing X. They tightened up their borders. They did, X, Y, Z. There is some stance to save face.
Let's put $50 on it and see if it ends today or not.
I'll give you 5 because those odds are pretty bad against me. So I was trying to bring a little bit of hope back into the system.
I don't necessarily disagree in the sense that I don't think it'll be. Look, it's going to have to get resolved. There's something there. Like, this is a ton of pressure. Because the other thing is, let's kind of go down the other way and say, oh, it doesn't. Again, my personal opinion, what I've been kind of sharing and advising people is that, well, if you stop things like the de minimis or whatever, and you really feel that this is an issue, it's not going to stop at 3 countries. It won't be able to stop at 3 countries. It'll have to essentially extend to everyone, because if your illicit drugs was really the problem, it'll just go from country A to country B, from country B to country C. It would move, right?
Yeah.
So the reality is that eventually it would have to be everyone, which means like the de minimis program or this $800 duty free kind of 321 filing is going to go for everyone. That's why I don't think that there's anything fast enough that could happen. And you know, there is pressure there because now the US is in a position where, like, if they're going to hold the line on that, it's going to have to be for everyone, which means that they're going to really get a lot. Like Japan was on them already, South Korea, and people think that, but you know, you're talking about LG, you're talking about Samsung, you know what I mean, in terms of like big worldwide manufacturers, right? You know, obviously Canada, China, Mexico, the Mexican sorry, I don't know, she's it's president, president, yeah. Her statement the other day was very strong, and I'm super curious to see what she's coming out with today, because I have a feeling it's gonna.
Well, we have some comments, and I think it's because it shows us as LinkedIn user, and I think it's Jess, because Jess was just posting on LinkedIn as well. I'm hoping it's Jess, but she's made a great point. You know, caved on the freezing of federal funds. I mean, anything is possible. He caved an already. On that, right?
He didn't really cave. The Supreme Court was like, no, you can't do that, and he didn't want to start losing case after case after case. So now China, in all fairness, and Canada are both looking at actually filing lawsuits. Again, admittedly, I don't know how big of a play or a runway, whatever they have, especially being, you know, outside of the US and the US legal system, or if it's more just some, you know, world organization that would kind of like try to push this. But that's why he caved on the federal funds. But then if that was Jess, I go offer to show you what department they closed this morning, which I wasn't familiar with the acronym, so to speak, but I think it was essentially like USAID, which was like, you know, a federal agency that gave out millions and billions of dollars of humanitarian aid. They basically told people, don't come in this morning, and they're looking to shut down the department.
Well, the other thing I wanted to kind of show and talk about as we do is I had an email come in. And it came in from the Fresh Produce Association, which is International Fresh Produce and Flower Association. And I kind of was reading it. I kind of give you the gist, and maybe if I make it bigger, because I don't know if you guys can see.
Yeah, like that'd be nice. There we go. Oh yeah, readable.
Readable, right? Basically, the line that I kind of found interesting is a lot of businesses, I think, are going to take this very similar stance to what the IPA did here. Is kind of take a middle ground and see what happens stance, and that's what a lot of people are doing. Everybody has the right to feed themselves, and they should, absolutely. But at the same time, we're going to do everything we can. We look forward to working with the administration to, you know, empower growers and empower our domestic avenues that we can. And I think a lot of businesses shouldn't be taking a wait and hold and be very specific on what they ought to do in these circumstances. I know the automotive industry is obviously pushing very hard. Be like, hey, these tariffs are horrible for business. It's going to be very bad it's not going to be as easy as you're making it out to be. Stop misleading. And there's other sectors, but there's other sectors that are saying, hey, you know, let's see what happens. And other ones are good. Let's pull out of these countries and move back into the United States, and we'll figure it out. I'm curious.
Yeah, I do agree. I think a lot of people should be careful. I think honestly, short term, that consumer, like that e-commerce field, I think is going to be one that's going to get really, really impacted, more in the sense that I think that even if there's a quick resolution or whatever, I think it scared a lot of people. And I think it really highlighted the fact that for a market like, right, the Canadian and the US market, a very consuming material sort of culture, right, where we're buy, and so much of our economy is based on, you know, buying. I think it's going to have some pretty impactful changes, because I think a lot of companies are going to say, not risking this again, even if we get through it now and it's a little status quo short term. I think more brands, retailers, you know, sort of anyone that's in that product world that, you know, sells to consumers in some way, is going to start looking for different ways to set up their overall supply chain, their operations, which is funny then because, for everyone talking about silly things with like, oh my God, FedEx and UPS with their 5% rate increase, like fundamentally changing some of these big structures radically changes your cost base if you've been getting away on low cost labor, duty free options, and essentially, taking advantage of 6 different loopholes to sell your stuff for $20.
That's a great point. And I'm just going to read another comment because Jess said it is Jess. So now we know it's Jess. I mean, the point is
we do know that she outed or something. We can't see on StreamYard, Jess. You know that.
I mean, the point is the administration isn't afraid to be walked back. Was Jess's point?
Hey, I don't know. I like I said, I hope because I think this is really crazy, and
So,
very
and kind of
it's
tying
just battling.
Tying this back into logistics piece, we had this conversation a few weeks ago. The overall sentiment was in the freight market that in the U.S. they were quote unquote, the freight recession is over. This is not going to help the freight recession. I
Oh
think
my God,
this is going to create very much instability. Hearsay. I've heard of comments of products stopping because they weren't sure of what the tariff's going to be. They didn't want to get caught halfway. People really are reassessing in Hamilton, which is in Ontario.
In all fairness, if you're already out of your warehouse or you're in transit like before midnight tonight, everything is indicating that you're fine. You won't be tariffed.
Well, but there's a lot of product that being manufactured. There's a lot of food stuff that has shelf
food
life.
Is fast. You're right.
So there's a lot of product that you have to start manufacturing that's going to be stuck in limbo, right? And the steel one was the one I was using. Stelco had to cancel a whole bunch of orders this morning because they can't start manufacturing this process today because they don't know if it's going to be able to be shipped out or who's buying it. There's a lot of contracts being canceled, so a lot of instability and unsurety because they don't know where it's going to lie. And we're going to see a lot of different manufacturers doing the same thing. You talk about food processing. We send there's a lot of meat sent from Mexico and from Canada into the United States and from the United States back into Canada, and they're going to be going, hey, what are we going to be butchering? Are we going to be doing this? We're going to manufacture this food. Are we going to be sending it up north? It's a big question,
because that's such a good point. I actually, you're right. A lot of people don't really realize that to have like fast moving supply chains, and even though they seem slow, they're really fast in the grand scheme of things when you think of levels of production, movement, and all stuff like that. Like you're right, food especially, but pretty much anything now. Like so, food.
Costco hot dogs all come from one place, right? You're not going to be able to get your Costco. It might be, and they never raise the price, right?
But that's what I mean. Like that has to be planned out, and they have to know what it's doing. But even something as silly on the flip side, like if you're a consumer product, and you're using like co-manufacturing, right? You're using contract manufacturing. That stuff is scheduled well in advance. Like you've got your slot, you're sharing resources. Like some of these brands are going to be really, really stuck. And then to your point about like the demand and stuff, I think I was mentioning quickly just before we came on, Jason Miller. And Jason Miller is like one of the best people on LinkedIn you can follow for like real data when it comes to logistics.
Solid.
So good, like beyond good. But he actually saw that he put out this term this morning called demand destruction, which I thought was, it's obviously very heavy, but I agree. Like, I mean, I don't think people realize just how sensitive some of these movements and these transfers and these supply chains are. And like all of a sudden if you have everybody there that's all afraid all at the same time, and now all of a sudden demand just drops right off, it's going to be intense. It was from this morning, but yeah, he was showing a graph about like when manufacturing takes a dip, what happens consequently to the transportation market.
Let's see.
And he just like he was just like, oh, it's demand destruction, and I'm like, yeah, that's a really harsh but accurate frame, because that is really what ends up happening when all of these goods that are based on these modified just-in-time type inventories all have radical changes to their production plans.
I'm trying to pull it up for us quickly here, John, so if you can.
Yeah, it's all good. I was trying to fill the space, but like I can't stretch that anymore. It should be a graph. It should be there it is. And he's got it beautiful, like he's highlighted it. Yeah, there you go. There's demand destruction. and he used like a previous example of where manufacturing dropped off. But very, very cool. And like, I mean, data wise, not impact wise, but just well thought out, really smart stuff. Like, so if you're not following Jason, totally do that.
Yeah, but it's a great point. Like the uncertainty creates instability in the choices that you make, and the choices that you make as a manufacturer, as a shipper, as a retailer, as whatever, impacts the supply chain, impacts the movement of goods, and also subsequently impacts it further down the line as well. It takes time to restart the machine to keep moving, right?
Well, sorry, not just restart it, but I mean, the reality is that keep in mind, like, when you have all of your different products, whether it's made in Canada, made in the US, imported, whatever, manufacturing, all of this stuff that everyone applies broadly to everything, like economies of scale, those concepts all came from manufacturing, where those runways of that economy of scale are very, very legit, and people have really leaned into them for a long time. The whole reason you can buy private label products at most stores is because they're tapping into those tail ends of the available capacity and getting, getting good deals for the fact that the machine is running to produce branded goods or this and that. If all of that falls down, if all of those levels fall down, irrespective of brand, price, or manufacturer, everything goes up in price, because now, hey, if it costs me $10,000 an hour to run that machine and I'm at 70% capacity, but to produce 40%, so to speak, I have to be on, that's where all those costs come from. And that's where all those increases come from.
One other thing that we should probably talk about in that supply chain is there's just-in-time supply chain as well, which you only have an hour or two, or maybe not even a day worth of supply. So once that manufacturing stops, those plants are, I mean, it's famous for a lot of these plants charging not truckers, but logistics and other companies thousands upon thousands of dollars for late deliveries because they need that product just in time. So now if there's not enough of that demand, to your point, if they're running at 100% capacity to meet that schedule, and all of a sudden that capacity just bottoms out, it's a problem. And it's a lot of jobs on both sides, because the supply chain goes both ways. There's a lot of product, bolts and nuts and these things that are built and they're made in these supply chains for a long time that can't just be switched overnight, right?
No, exactly.
So there's going to be an increase there, obviously, for pricing, and then it's going to take a long time to figure out what we're doing and how we're going to do it. So I don't know.
And even and sorry, even silly things. I mean, this is like when you get into the weeds of like where the real impact for some of this comes up. Even silly stuff like, let's just say French's is a good example, because I saw this kind of ad the other day. I think you sent it to me, actually. That Buy Canadian guy slapping stuff around. Yep. But like Heinz versus French's and stuff, and like, even if all of a sudden every Canadian was like, I'm not buying Heinz and we're just buying French's, even if they had the raw material, you start actually getting into problems with, like, I actually don't have enough packaging, I don't have enough labels, I don't have enough this, I don't have enough that. And then there can be really even more nuanced things where, like, well, you guys only use this type of bottle and not that type of bottle, and that type of bottle actually has a different fill rate than the other type of bottle, and I can actually, even at max capacity, can produce less, which means my overall capacity is down, which means my costs go up. It's so insane. And this is stuff that you and we don't really talk about on here. We like to, you like to talk about Amazon, Walmart, like the stuff that everybody sees at their back door. But like, the funny thing is that that's what it really takes. And that's why I talk about all the time, people having, do you really understand your data? Do you really understand your sales? Do you really understand the nuance of all of these things? Because ketchup isn't ketchup. Like, that 500 ml bottle versus the 750 versus the 1 liter versus like the squeeze top versus the screw, like the high efficiency squeeze top, whatever. All of these things, they all matter. They all matter.
Cynthia just made a great point. We are still very high in inventory than before COVID. Yeah, one thing that COVID did lead to is a higher inventory for most companies, just in case of the blips in the supply chains, and people aren't just as much just in time as they were before. But there's still a lot of, to like John's point, there's all these manufacturers of different places of products that do affect.
Yeah, sorry, I agree. I don't think it's an issue with holding inventory. Like, I don't think we're going to run out of stock. That's not what I'm necessarily trying to say. I just think that it means, like, all of these shifts, are bumps in the road. If anything, with related to inventory, probably the biggest unexpected impact, let's say cost wise or operations wise, for a lot of brands will be like their velocity may significantly change, which might mean higher warehousing costs or like higher transportation costs, having to move like 70% of the goods when it should have been a truckload or something like that. So I think that there's probably more of a risk just for general cost increases in everyone's business, more so than the panic of not finding toilet paper on the shelf.
Great times. Well, there's an egg scare right now. The shortage of eggs in the United States. I don't know if you saw that.
Oh, because of the flu or whatever.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
simple things. Normally, you can come across to Canada, but thankfully, the wife and kids went across yesterday. They said it was a flawless trip across the border. I live close to the border. There was a little bit of
Try it
worry.
again today. Let's see what happens.
That's what we did on Sunday because it was still kind of quiet. But good plan. But you're curious to see how the shipping, if it increases from manufacturers, and next week we'll have a different conversation. Obviously, see the post week of tariffs. But on that note, John, because we are over 6 minutes, we did start 3 minutes late, so I figure we can give ourselves some leeway. John, what are some things that we can kind of focus on this week that will make an impact?
I think everyone should just be, especially the smaller brands. Look, the big ones are going to have like they got like tons of resources to be able to dive into this. But if you're sort of medium, small startup, like you're kind of going down the scale that way, just really don't panic. Don't just have knee-jerk reactions and stuff like that. I think everyone needs to really understand like quickly, hey, top SKUs, top sales regions, top channels, and then just triage it and specifically make plans based on what's moving the most. And you might need to make some decisions about like, hey, we're going to focus on this core product and or services or whatever, and not this for the moment, or prioritize. But I agree with Matt. Like I don't think that this can be a long-standing thing. It's getting a very negative reaction, and I think it's overall, I don't think it's going to do well for the US anyway. So I suspect there'll be changes, but I do think that there's going to be some long-term changes and stuff. So understand your data, your movements, and start working on prioritizing your operations. I mean, the reality is, I think if one thing is probably clear, is that your costs now, like all of the cost pressures that have been increasing, are going to continue to increase, and they're just getting more nuanced and more detailed when you have to manage them.
And just to echo that, just be informed as well. Reach out to your peers and across the different, your competitors, because knowing what's going on in the whole global sense is going to be just as important. So reaching out to your freight forwarders, reaching out to your manufacturers, reaching out to all these different players that you have within your supply chain to get informed, including your transportation, your last mile guys, to see how it's affecting them. There is going to be a lot of instability, and some of these people will not be able to shake through on this instability, and they might be on shaky ground, right? So there's been already a lot of pressure from last year. This pressure is going to start continuing at the beginning of this year. It's good to be informed on what is going on within your vendor list and how they're impacted by this. Just because you might think that your product is good, they might have lost 80% of their other vendors, and they might not be as successful as you think, and you're going to have to be scrambling and finding other sources.
Yeah, good point.
Makes sense. But awesome. On that note, wake up and deliver. We'll see you next week. Yeah. As always, same time, same bat time, same bat channel.
Oh, I like it. Very good.
Same delivery time, same delivery location.
Yeah.